Welcome back to the channel. Some years ago, almost 10 years ago, I hosted a podcast called SCIFI on Screen. The podcast lasted about 5+ years, and I gently closed it down in order to transition into a YouTube channel talking more about books and movies. But I reviewed films one at a time, sometimes compared originals to remakes, sometimes I did special shows. But a lot of the criticisms and a lot of the critiques and analysis that I did for these films, I stand by. And so I thought, since I've done over about 100 shows, that I would share the archives with my new audience here on my YouTube channel. The shows range from about 45 minutes or so more of a podcast. I'll just put up a static image of the old logo, and you can listen and enjoy. So I'm going to do these weekly, and hope you enjoy. Welcome to Sci-Fi on Screen, the podcast that goes where no podcast has gone before. We here at Sci-Fi on Screen take a deep, close look at your favorite genre movies of science fiction, horror, fantasy, and comic book land. We go deep, scene by scene. We do comparisons of originals and remakes, and special shows. Just ahead, a new episode. And thanks for listening. Okay, welcome back to Sci-Fi on Screen. This episode, we're going to be taking a look at Jurassic Park. I just saw the new Jurassic World. I thought I would talk about the one Jurassic Park film that I liked. And it did not include Jurassic World, but that's another story. So I want to start off the show with some housekeeping, as I like to call it. I want to thank Sean Plowman for liking Sci-Fi on Screen on Facebook. Really appreciate it, Sean. I want to share some Reddit comments that I got. I believe this was for Night of the Living Dead, put up a couple of weeks ago. Someone named MI-16Evil, M-I-Evil, perhaps a Metallica fan, said, you could release it as a video podcast with commentary and the film. The film is in the public domain, so it'd be legal. Interesting idea. I mean, I know ultimately the way that I do these podcasts, video would be ideal, but once in a while as a film in the public domain, right? But then you're getting into copyright and fair use and all that stuff, and it's just not worth it. Like I would eventually like to make a few bucks someday on this podcast. Not that it'll be much, but I don't want to have to deal with lawyers and Paramount Pictures and whoever else I'd have to deal with in terms of saying why I used their rightly so intellectual property and made money off of it. So I think editing a video podcast the way I do this would be very long. So there you go. I want to thank some folks for their brief reviews on iTunes, which I love when folks come on and show their appreciation on iTunes. There's one person named Walking the Dog who wrote, "Smart show with fresh ideas, fun, gave me 5 stars." So thanks, Walking the Dog. And then someone else on iTunes named Cast1701, 1701. He's a Trek fan of some repute right there. But he wrote on the review, "I'm currently listening to the review on Star Trek The Motion Picture, and just by listening to this episode, I plan on listening to the rest of the reviews and more to come. I highly recommend it." So thanks, Cast1701. And again, 5 stars. So thank you very much. And thanks to everyone who lets me know that they're listening in whatever ways they do. So thanks. So let me do a little background on Jurassic Park. Even before the novel was published, Spielberg learned of it in 1989 when he and Crichton were working on the initial pilot screenplay that would become ER. That was a Crichton brainchild since he was formerly trained as a doctor. Also wrote a book, I believe, called 2 books, 5 Patients, which was a nonfiction book about some patients at a hospital up in Boston, and A Case of Need, which I think was a sort of a medical thriller way back early in his career. I think he was writing under the name Jeffrey Hudson. They talked about his idea for the novel, and Spielberg, what fascinated him was that, the idea was a really credible look at how dinosaurs might someday be brought back alongside modern mankind, right? But before we we kind of knew about genetics. You're either going to do time travel or like a Lost World scenario. And so Spielberg was kind of piqued by, Crichton's take on it. Before the book was published, Crichton demanded a non-negotiable fee of $1.5 million, as well as a substantial percentage of the gross of the film. So after completing Hook, Spielberg wanted to do Schindler's List. And then the parent company of Universal Pictures, a company called Music Corporation of America, this guy, Sid Sheinberg, he greenlit Schindler on the condition that Spielberg make Jurassic Park first. And one last little bit from Spielberg, he declared earlier that by choosing, a creature thriller, that he was really trying to make a good sequel to Jaws on land. So that's kind of his approach. A little bit about the dinosaurs. They considered that life-size dinosaurs would be way too expensive and not really that convincing. So Spielberg kind of went after the best effects guys in Hollywood, and he brought in Stan Winston, who created animatronic dinosaurs, a guy named Phil Tippett to create what they call go-motion dinosaurs for long shots. This guy, Michael Lentieri, supervised on-set effects, and Dennis Murin, who folks on this podcast might know from ILM, to do digital compositing. And they got a paleontologist by the name of Jack Horner to supervise the dinosaur designs. And Spielberg really wanted to be as accurate as current knowledge was, rather than just have them be these crazy monsters. Winston's department created fully detailed models of the dinosaurs before molding the latex skins, which were fitted over this complex robotics. And this guy Tippett created stop motion animatics of the raptors in the kitchen and the T-Rex attacking the car, but Spielberg did not like what he saw in terms of a live-action feature film. So Dennis Murin of ILM said to Spielberg, I can build these for you in the computer, totally CGI. And Spielberg said, well, okay, prove it. So he got a crew together. I guess they put together something called a walk cycle for the T-Rex skeleton, which is probably a bare bones animatic done on the computer. As soon as Spielberg saw it, he was done. Although no what they call go motion was used, Tippett and his animators were still used by the production to supervise the movement that the CGI guys were coming up with. So this guy Tippett acted as a consultant regarding the anatomy, and all of his stop motion animators were retrained as CGI guys. So this was really at the turning point, the entry of CGI, like Cameron's The Abyss and Jurassic Park, and this is really kind of the beginning of the flood, as it were, that would come after. The ILM guys went to see private animal parks and zoos so they could study animals, and they took mime classes to understand movements, which is very cool. I mean, what a place to work, right? A special effects studio. My God, how fun. Okay, so let's jump into the film. The film opens, obviously, with it's a very brief credit scene, and then we're in this night scene where basically they're bringing a raptor from somewhere, and they're adding it to their sort of raptor pen. And there's this whole sequence where we see Muldoon, played by this British actor Bob Peck, who's amazing, with this huge team of people wanting to offload this crate. And it's night, and there's lots of lights. Spielberg's fascination with lights of all kinds is all over this film, and I'll talk about that as we go. We get a little title card that says Isla Nublar, 120 miles west of Costa Rica. Throughout this whole sequence, there's an animal inside this metal cage, and it's just making all these crazy sounds, and everyone's scared shitless of it. And there are times when the camera is filming from the cage out, and we see the faces of the people who are tending to it are scared to death. So they do this whole thing about opening the gate. They put the cage, they lock it, and then this guy gets up on the top and he raises the gate, but something goes wrong, and the whole thing pops out, and whatever animal is inside grabs him. The way Spielberg does it is great. We never see the animal. All we see, it's almost like a shark attack, if you think about it. Like we saw at the beginning of Jaws, right? Where all we see is the girl and her moving around and coming up and down and then disappearing. This is sort of like, the land version of Jaws. We see this guy halfway disappear into the cage. Then he's actually up in the air, and then he's down, up in the air, and again. And he's getting cut to pieces. Everyone around the cage empties their tasers at it, and nothing does anything. And so Muldoon screams, shoot her, and you hear the weapons start to fire. There's all this great lighting scenes and very intense. The Wood Johns Williams music comes up, and then we're out. And then we cut to a mine, an amber mine in the Dominican Republic, and we meet Donald Gennaro, the lawyer in this film. Boy, this film really goes after lawyers, and I'll talk about how hypocritical that is later. This scene is about the lawyer Gennaro is coming to talk. He wants to talk to Hammond, and Hammond is not there. So his worker, his sort of main worker, is there. The accident that we witnessed sort of kicked off the investors of the park that we hear are really skittish now, and they want some experts to come down and sign off on the safety of it. So we're getting all this, exposition from the lawyer, and at the same time, we're going into the amber mine. We're seeing all this work. Spielberg and his lights again. When we finally get to this piece of amber that was found, all the guys with the headlamps gather around, and it's such a very dramatic moment where, they look at this amber and we slowly close in and we see a mosquito in the middle of it, but it's perfect Spielbergian glory. All these lights are canted at certain angles. There's a little foggy in there. And we hear Gennaro mention that they're bringing down a guy named Grant. The guy that we meet, this Dominican Republic dude, knows Grant, and the last line is, Grant's a digger. You'll never get him out of Montana like me. And then they cut away. So now we cut to this site, supposedly in Montana, and it's a dinosaur bone dig site. It's this great shot. It starts off very close in, and we're seeing brushes going at this skeleton. The camera sort of goes up in the air and shoots straight down, and we see the skeleton emerge of a velociraptor, and it's just done so great. It's just a wonderful little camera trick, very thoughtful, as Spielberg is in most of this film and where he puts the camera. We meet Grant, played by British actor Sam Neill, and we meet Elsie Sattler, played by Ellie Sattler, I think, Laura Dern. So they're doing this brief thing where they're doing seismic mapping, so they're slamming these pellets into the ground. Computer measures the waves, and the waves will go through certain things faster than others, creating these differential patterns. And they see this thing come up, this wonderful skeleton comes out of nowhere. The cool thing here is when they see the skeleton of the velociraptor buried in the hills, Sattler and Grant start talking as if the audience isn't there in very detailed paleontological terms. They're like, oh, look at the thigh bone is inverted like a bird's, and all this stuff. And I love right away, like they're not, for a blockbuster film, and I'll follow this as we go, it does not shy away from character moments and from science. And it's great. It's because the sequels mostly have just said, it's dinosaurs and kids and a lot of scares. But there's a lot of science in this film, and they leave it in. It's allowed to be there. And I think it grounds the film in a way the sequels just do not come close to. Spielberg and his writers are like, look, you can either keep up or not. It's not going to be that long, but I don't know. To me, Grant and Ellie, they come across as real people because we get this kind of dip into real scientific jargon. These are not just Hollywood bone snatchers, right? They seem like real paleontologists, and it's a subtle touch that I think works really well. And there's this great scene where this young kid says to Grant, oh, it looks just like an overgrown turkey. And then Grant goes into this great long speech about, imagine you're in the Cretaceous, and he talks about Velociraptor being a pack hunter. And then we hear things like its visual acuity is not movement based like the T-Rex. So we're getting all these little, and most of this stuff is hooey anyway, which I'll talk about at the end of the film. But it's great. I mean, it's great pseudoscience sort of for the movie. He's got the part of a Velociraptor's toe is this big scythe-like hook. And at the end, he kind of uses it on the kid. And it's just a really good scene. At the end of it, Grant's like, so please, a little respect, for these animals. And then we get a sense of Laura Dern in these scenes too. And Dern's just wonderful. She has a very winning presence. I don't know really what that means, but I know what I mean when I say it. So she's just very winning in this film. I really like her, and her character's awesome. For a female character in a major motion picture, she's awesome. And I'll get to, what a cool, smart, tough scientist that she is. And it's not fake, This helicopter touches down, and, this guy John Hammond is waiting in their trailer, and it's Sir Richard Attenborough as John Hammond. And he lays on, the plot, which is... I'll fund your dig for 3 years if you just come with me for the weekend and check out my park. There's this moment when Laura Dern and Sam Neill, and their characters, when they find out that he's going to fund the dig for 3 years, they're really geeky. In that moment, Sam Neill can be kind of a dashing actor, right? And he usually plays very sophisticated or very dashing kind of characters in a way. He's a geek here. He's a paleontologist geek. And there's that one moment where he kind of breaks into a smile, and it's very... You're with them. You're like, boy, they're just very cute, sweet. They just want to dig up their bones and do their thing. And I don't know. It's just a nice moment. So then we cut to San Jose, capital of Costa Rica. We meet Louis Dodgson, who works for a rival company, meeting with Dennis Nedry, played by a pre-Seinfeld Wayne Knight. And this whole bit of a plot here is that Nedry's going to steal some dinosaur embryos for Dodgson's company, and they're going to catch up on like 10 years of research because Hammond and InGen are so far ahead. And it's it is what it is. It sets up the scene, nothing special. Now we're going to go to what I call the sort of the awe and wonder setup in this film. And I think so much of why Jurassic Park works is because there's a real love for dinosaurs in this film, in and around the terror that they go through. We're all choppering out to the island, and we meet Ian Malcolm, played by the wonderful Jeff Goldblum. Donald Gennaro and Hammond and Ellie and Grant are there. Spielberg and John Williams, what they can do with a simple, beautiful island. Get some nice shots of this beautiful island. Malcolm, a little bit, we find out he's a chaos theorist, and Goldblum's great. He's dressed all in black, and he has that great delivery of his. He's a very welcome presence in this film, although I think this film is very well balanced in terms of characters, but Malcolm's great. And so, yeah, we have this wonderful, majestic opening. And then we have the introduction of the dinosaurs, and I want to talk about this very detailed because I think this is a key part of why this film works so well. So they're in these Jeeps. They're on the island. They're driving through part of the park, and all of a sudden they stop. And the camera starts to slowly track into Grant, who's sitting in the back seat, and it slowly tracks into him as a fairly tight close-up. And Sam Neill is brilliant here. So first he takes off his hat. Then he takes off his sunglasses. He stands up, and sort of the camera meets him as he stands, and he's even closer to the camera now. And we just see his facial expression of this incredulity, which is just amazing. We haven't seen any dinosaurs yet. We're just looking at Grant. And then the camera focuses on Ellie, and she's looking at his map, and he just grabs her head. She's just talking about other stuff. So he grabs her head and turns it towards the dinosaurs. And then we get the same close-up of her, awe and wonder. She gets up, the camera tracks in on her face. Now we've been totally set up. We know it's coming, right? We know it's coming. You don't walk into a film called Jurassic Park and you're going to be surprised when you see dinosaurs, right? But still, Spielberg, I think, sets up the emotional payoff by spending plenty of time looking at these dino geeks and their reaction to what we have yet not seen. And then, finally, we get the shot of the brachiosaur walking across the screen. Massive. And we've been prepped emotionally. It's really, really awesome. It's a funny moment where Grant and Ellie both get out of the truck and they're walking, and Grant's just so overwhelmed. He points at the brachiosaur and he looks back at Ellie and is like, it's a dinosaur. Like he's been reduced to, by saying it like that, like he's been reduced to the level of a child. And it's very smart. And the CGI of the brachiosaur is definitely dated. If you're going to go at this movie, there are certain things that are definitely dated, but you don't really give a shit because you're so emotionally on board because of this setup and John Williams' music. I feel like if I lived my life to John Williams' music, I don't know, I think I'd be like the happiest, most inspired man on the planet. He just has that way about him of when the moments are right, he can just lift you right up. And then they do this low-angle shot as if you're standing behind Ellie and Alan Grant shooting up, and you get the neck of the brachiosaur as it's eating from the top tree. It's just a great way, very vertiginous shot, great way of getting at the scale of these things in such a clever way. And then, of course, the camera focuses in on Gennaro, and his reaction is completely opposite. We're going to make a fortune with this place. Obviously, he meets his demise at the business end of a T-Rex. But you know what? The lawyer bashing in this film, there are several times when Hammond says the scum-sucking lawyer, and the lawyer gets eaten, the lawyer betrays the kids, guys like Spielberg and Crichton, they live on lawyers. Like, they couldn't get out of bed without 8 lawyers in their life, managing their affairs on a day-to-day basis. And yet, I feel like it's very condescending. It's like, well, the masses hate lawyers, so let's paint lawyers in a dirty light. They'll be the bad guys. What an easy target. I just find it so disingenuous. Like, guys like Crichton and Spielberg and that level, the lawyers come to their kids' graduations, for Christ's sakes. They're like lifelong friends. They're part of their lives, and very good friends and good people, right? And yet, they're sort of vilified by Hollywood in a way. It's I don't know. I find like come on, Hollywood. The bloody town is run by lawyers. It's kind of absurd. So anyway, my little rant about that. It's not really that important. And right after that scene, there's a swelling of music again, John Williams, and the camera is on Hammond, and he's like, "Welcome to Jurassic Park." And then the camera swivels, and you get this beautiful widescreen shot of all the the brachiosaurs in a herd, and then another set of dinosaurs. Forget the names of them. I'm going to do a dino wrap-up at the end of the podcast of all the dinosaurs that were in it and how realistic they were to what we know today. So I'll remember them then. We hear Grant like they're moving in herds. They're acting like scientists, and it's a through line in the film, which I really, really, really like. All right, so now we jump to, we start to get the plot. Obviously, we want to know how these things are made, right? So there's this wonderful, clever thing that is attributed to Spielberg that Hammond and the park designed this animatic, this cartoon, if you will, explaining the process. And our main characters are all on this little ride watching it, but we're watching it with them. And we start with them watching it, but then, of course, the screen becomes our screen. So it's really for us. And it's very clever. And they don't skimp. They actually, to me, it always amazes me, and how this is done so little these days. So whenever I see it back in the day, I was blown away. But they talk about a fairly complex process of DNA being the building blocks of life, and how do you get dinosaur DNA and a mosquito and amber, and it's done really beautifully. And you're given this, they just decide to do it all. And it's necessary because if you're going to back up the film, if this is going to be a real film and not a fantasy film, you need this info, and to me, it was a very creative way to do it as in a sense, we're both watching the same training reel, which is kind of cool. Then, the ride moves on and they're looking now at the real lab where they're cooking the dinosaurs up, and Malcolm, Grant, and Ellie are they get off the ride and run into the lab, and we meet the main geneticist, Henry Wu, who I believe makes an appearance in Jurassic World as well. He's still around, still working there. And they're asking him all kinds of questions and, very scientific questions, and how do you interrupt cellular mitosis? And the writers are be on board or not, because they've got other things in store for you as well. And then we get this beautiful scene of a raptor hatching out of an egg, and it takes its time. It's very beautiful, a lot of wonder and awe again about, my God, a little dinosaur. And there's this little animatronic dinosaur inside the egg and pecks its way out. It's really cool. A pet Hammond takes it in his hand, and it's really sweet. So we're getting set up here, not by how terrible these things are. We've got a little bit of that in the beginning, but, the author and the director's fascination with these animals. And boy, does it come across in a really wonderful way. So we get a little bit more information. Malcolm, of course, being the chaos theoretician, is very skeptical about all this. And he's like, how do you control them? How do you keep them from breeding? And we hear that, Wu say that they've been bred to be all female. And then Malcolm gives a brief little speech about, you think you can, this is one of the most powerful forces in the natural world, and you think you can just kind of control it. And Wu's kind of taken aback, well, how would they do it? Everyone's female. And Malcolm's like, life just finds a way. And that will come later as his words bear out. But it's great. And Malcolm's the great skeptic in this whole thing. It's Hammond versus Malcolm, which is wonderful. And we find out that the little creature that hatched out of the egg is a raptor. And then we get this little Alan Grant close-up, you bred raptors. And then we cut to the raptor pen. And we witness this feeding thing where they lower this live cow into the raptor pen. I don't even know if you could do that these days and get away with it. I'm trying to remember what they did in Jurassic World when they fed the big mosasaur, the aquarium, what it fed on. But, live cow, and they lower it in there. The raptors go berserk, and, when the thing comes up, it's just dangling canvas and metal. They totally devoured the whole thing. So then we get our full-on introduction to Muldoon, played by this actor Bob Peck, who's awesome. And I mostly know him from the British version of Edge of Darkness, which was a miniseries back in the 80s. And he's a very intense actor. And it's great as we start to get the ominous description of the raptors, right? Hammond wants them all to go to lunch, but Peck's talking to Grant, and he's like, when you see the main female, it's like she's working things out. And we hear that they're testing the fences, but in different places, and the fences are electrified. And, Bob Peck's like, they remember. He's so intense in this. He's sort of like the really freaked out hunter with a very intense face. He's great. He's great. So now we have this lunch where, Hammond sort of gets his comeuppance, and Malcolm starts it out by talking about, this lack of humility over this genetic power. And he goes into this thing, which I really love, talking about the discipline to use something, and he doesn't get very specific about it, but I have the same analogy, and I kind of understand what he's talking about, where he's accusing Hammond of stealing all this technology from everyone else and just kind of slapping it together and putting it on a lunchbox. He didn't go through the discipline of acquiring the power, so he's not really fit to use it. And I feel like what he's talking about is like gun versus martial arts, right? You can study a martial arts discipline for, years and years and years, and you rarely hear about people who know martial arts abusing it and getting into fights all the time, because they've spent all this time disciplining themselves in the acquisition of this power, as it were. And somehow in that process, they become very responsible in its use. Whereas, anyone can just walk into a store and buy a gun and go kill somebody. You didn't create the gun. You didn't spend hours learning ballistics and metallurgy and rifling and all the things that go into make a gun. And you don't respect the power of it. It's a tool that you just can use, And I love that they get at that. I don't think they use the right argument, because Malcolm sort of accuses him of stealing work from others. But like, they did all this work to bring these dinosaurs to life. I mean, so I feel like a better example would have suited here. But I like that they put it in the movie anyway. And I love that this discussion is allowed to exist in the film. Grant is also kind of against it, where he's like, dinosaurs and humans have never shared the same time era. What can we possibly know about how this is going to work out? And Hammond's kind of... And this is where he says, the only one on my side is the blood-sucking lawyer, and, ha, ha, ha. But I love the debate. It's like an ethics debate over lunch, and it's great. I mean, I don't remember this debate in any of the sequels at all. But I think it's great because it keeps the film, grounded in the theme of it all, like, in a sense, this kind of genetic Manhattan Project and what will it have wrought, So I like it a lot. And then we get the introduction of Malcolm's grandkids, Lex and Tim. Lex is the older girl. She's played by this actress, Ariana Richards, who's fantastic. Like, I think the girl in this film is really good. Like, in so many different scenes, she's just really, they're scared out of their young lives, most of this movie, but she's fantastic. The young kid, Joe Mazzello, is good too. So we're introduced to them briefly. So now we begin the main island tour. We have a little bit of character development. Tim is a dinosaur freak, and he's read all these books, and he's trying to, talk to Grant, and Grant's like, get out of my face, kid. They're off, and as they're going through the tour, they don't see shit. Like, it's like all the dinosaurs have kind of hidden. They're not out. They don't see anything. So we get this, beginning anticlimax, which is terrific. And then we keep cutting back to the control room. Now we meet guy Mr. Arnold, played by Samuel L. Jackson in an early role, and Dennis Nedry. Now we see Nedry there, who we've met earlier when he was selling out his boss, and Hammond. And we see what a nightmare they're having, all this code, and there's 1,000 glitches with the park, 1,000 little things that don't work. And then we also find out that there's a storm on the way, and we don't know whether it's going to hit the island or not, so they drop all that. And we see a brief byplay between Nedry and Hammond, that Nedry is complaining that he's not getting paid enough, and Hammond kind of goes right at him. Your financial troubles are your own. You contracted it for this price, this is what I'm paying you. So we see why Nedry's doing what he's going to do. So then we're with our two vehicles and the groups, and Malcolm's explaining chaos theory to Ellie. He's so great. Jeff Goldblum is so funny in this. And there's this moment where, in the end of his explanation, Grant jumps out of the car because he sees a downed Triceratops, and Malcolm's like, see? Who would have thought that Dr. Grant would jump out of the car? And then Ellie jumps out after him and is like, see, there it is again. Who would have thought that I'd be here alone, talking to myself in the car? And it's just, he's great. And then we get this down Triceratops, which is great. They built an animatic Triceratops. It's really there. It's not CGI. Wonderful, because they can get up very close. And how we come upon it is we're following Grant as he's walking towards it. The camera's at ankle length, and suddenly the grass parts, and we see the Triceratops. And, Spielberg, man, he's... In these ways, he's just, quite the magician. It's wonderful. And there's this great scene where it's down because it's sick. It's been tranquilized, but something's wrong with it. Just the sheer joy and wonder of them being next to this thing. Like, Grant leans on it and he's listening to it breathing. And Ellie starts to cry, like how amazing that this is, this moment. And now this is her moment, because Ellie's a paleobotanist. and I guess she knows something of animal, or veterinarian skills. She seems very knowledgeable, but like she queries the guy taking care of the Triceratops, what's wrong? And she looks at the eyes and realizes that the pupils dilating is a pharmacological effect. So she thinks it's a plant, and she finds a plant nearby that's poisonous. But the only way they can figure out whether the trike ate it is for her to plunge her hand in these two huge mounds of shit. And she just does it. She's very much sort of a vet / scientist right here, in this moment. And the men are like left in the dust, and she's just kind of in her element. She puts these plastic sort of gloves on that reach all the way up to her armpits, and she's got her hand in this shit, picking out stuff. And I love that they do it. I love that they allow the female character to be a fucking scientist and to get her hands dirty in a way that's not so sexy in Hollywood. It's like, it's so great. And I also love what Laura Dern does with this. She makes it very matter of fact, and I believe every minute of what she does. So very cool. Ellie Sattler's moment. So we briefly cut back then to get more of our plot. The storm is not deviating, so they have to cut the tour short. Nedry's on the phone with his boat captain. There's a clock now. He's got to get down there before the boat leaves because of the storm. He has set this program, which is going to give him 20 minutes to get in and out of all the locked security rooms that he needs to get into for the embryos. And so in a ridiculously nervous way, he's about to leave, and he tells everyone that you're going to see systems going on and off all over the island, and don't worry about it. It's part of the program, and setting himself up, and then off he goes. And then we start with the rain, which is going to last for quite a while. And we follow Nedry through cryo storage, and we watch him pick out all of these embryos and put them in the Barbasol can. And then he vanishes. And the tension starts to really build well here because all of the fences have failed around the park, all of the electrified fences. And without Nedry around, they don't know how to turn them back on again. They check the raptor fences, and they realize that those are still up. So, that's a tease for later. And then we follow Nedry in the rain in his truck, going towards the east dock to sort of deliver his embryos. And we realize he knocked out all the gates so he can get through the main gate too and head to the dock. Now we get our Tyrannosaur paddock scene, which is the piece de resistance of this film. The tour vehicles stop because now the glitches are happening everywhere. They stop right outside the Tyrannosaur paddock, and the rain is coming down. And so you get this moment where you hear thunder, there's rain, it's dark. Everyone's bored and kind of waiting around. And then we start to see the water, Spielberg focuses in on the water glasses in the trucks, and they start to shake, and we get these little, waves in the glasses. Then we hear these steps continue. And then through the infrared goggles that Tim is wearing, we see that earlier on the tour, a goat had been lifted into place for the T-Rex to eat, so it would come out and, be shown on the tour. And when Tim sort of looks for the goat with his IR goggles at night, it's gone. And you just see the swinging little tether that it was on. Someone says, "Where's the goat?" And all of a sudden the camera pans up, and this bloody goat leg lands on the roof. Then the camera pans up, and we see the massive T-Rex head ingesting the goat. And it's incredible. They made the T-Rex, I think, a little bigger than it's supposed to be. The head is massive. But boy, what an impact. And you hear these guttural sounds coming from the Rex, and so the first thing that happens is the lawyer, Gennaro, freaks out, runs away, and hides in the bathroom. And she's leaving the kids. Boy, what Spielberg does to these kids in this film, boy, should be put away. But suddenly we see the cables of the fence go down, and now the full T-Rex reveal as he steps through the fence and roars. And it's unbelievable, man. To me, all of the T-Rex sequences in and around the paddock here, they don't date for a second, because I think they did CGI mixed with animatronics. Depending on how long the shot was and how close it was, they did both. When it wasn't the whole body moving, I think they used real animatronic chunks. Obviously when it's chasing things down, it's CGI, but man, it's scarier than anything still in any of the sequels, man. It is just amazing. He did the same thing. Obviously, I think Emmerich learned from him, but in Emmerich's Godzilla film, there's rain all the time. And I think they do that because it helps to distract from the fakeness of the CGI. Weather and smoke and debris and all that kind of stuff. It hides the flaws, so you're not seeing all the flaws, but you're getting the presence of the animals there in as real a fashion as you can. And I think Spielberg did that here big time. So now the whole deal is that the T-Rex's vision is based on movement, right? So that's the conceit here. And Lex turns on this light, and you're seeing it from Grant and Malcolm's point of view in the other truck, where there's this massive T-Rex, and then you see the kids with the flashlight, and it's, oh my God, the tension. And then there's this whole scene between the T-Rex and the kids. I can't imagine parents who brought their really young kids to this film. I mean, I saw it, I was in my mid-20s, so I was done, right? But it's intense. They can't turn the light off, so the T-Rex it won't stop leaving them alone. And, you get Lex with the light. Timmy's like, turn it off. And she's like, I can't. It's crazy. There's this transparent roof scene where the T-Rex goes right into the roof. And there's a moment where the jaws are open, and the only thing separating the T-Rex's mouth from the kids is like a 3-inch piece of, plastic. That's the car roof. And it's the scariest thing, man. It's really incredible. And the camera's very close, so this T-Rex head is just so bloody big. And then it just destroys the car. It knocks it over. It's just destroying the car, like in a really incredible way where, for sometimes you're like, are these kids really going to get out of here? And then finally Grant gets out. Him and Malcolm get out of the car, and Grant gets the attention of the T-Rex. And when that face comes around, it looks at him, man, you shit your pants. Like, oh, the face is so terrifying. So he throws a flare back into the paddock, and it's about to chase it, but then Malcolm gets out with his flare and starts running away. Somehow Malcolm is knocked unconscious, but the bathroom is destroyed, and Gennaro, the lawyer, gets eaten. I guess, the lawyer gets his comeuppance. So now Grant runs over to the car, and him and Lex are standing outside, and they're standing right next to the car, and they're doing the whole don't move, he can't see you, and the T-Rex head is right in front of him. And it's, I think Spielberg consciously also, too, the head is very big in the screen. Like, whenever that head's doing anything, man, it's very big in the screen. It just really helps convey how massive and powerful this thing is in an incredible way. It's very, very well mounted, very well done. So on the other side of the street, there's this cliff, and so the car gets knocked over. And so there's this whole sequence now where the car's in a tree. Grant has to get Tim out of the car before it's brilliant as a Hollywood tension device. The car slowly falling down the tree and them climbing out of the way, and then at the end it falls on them, but they don't get hurt. Like, it's Spielbergian, suspense at its best. And then they head out and they start walking, and then we cut to Calhoun and Ellie, who's now come out in a Jeep to kind of find them. And then we get also a little bit of plot that the Samuel L. Jackson character, this guy Arnold, is he's like, I can't fix this park without Dennis Nedry. So they're all screwed, they're all on their own in a way. And right after that, we get Nedry's demise by the Dilophosaurus. He runs off the road with the rain, and this Dilophosaurus finds him. And it's a creepy-looking dinosaur, man. Really, these great ridges on its head. And it's a little smaller than a raptor, which they did it on purpose. It's actually, I think it's a larger dinosaur, but they did it because they didn't want the audience to be confused whether that was a raptor or not. And it makes these really cool sounds. Nedry finally gets, spit in the eye, and then the thing tears into him inside the cab of the Jeep. The Jeep shakes around, and it's really creepy. And we see the Barbasol can, and we follow it down, and it goes into this riverbank and is covered, and is the end of Dennis Nedry. So Calhoun and Ellie find Malcolm. He's still alive. They're running around looking for the kids and Grant, and Malcolm's by himself, and he sees the water. The footprint of the T-Rex left an impression in the road of mud. It's filled with water, and so Malcolm's looking at it, and we're getting those same tremors. And we hear, it's impact tremor. And so basically Ellie and Calhoun get to the Jeep just as the T-Rex busts out of the trees behind them, and we get this chase. It's fun. It's a fun chase. And there's one moment where Calhoun's looking in the rearview mirror and sees the T-Rex's head, and engraved in the mirrors, objects in this mirror are larger than they appear, which is a very Spielberg jokey moment, in the middle of all this terror. And then we cut to this really wonderful scene where, they have to spend the night out in the woods, Grant and the kids. And so they go up a tree, and we get this moment of rest. It's night, and the brachiosaurs are out, and they're singing to each other. And, this is not just a terror after terror. Like, we're back to the wonder of the dinosaurs, And the complex notion here, which I love, is that, and to me, this is amazing, not all dinosaurs are dangerous, because this huge dinosaur is 10 feet in front of him, and Grant's not worried. The girl's a little freaked out, and they have this little joke between them that it's a vegisaurus, right? Not a meatosaurus, doesn't eat meat. But that not all dinosaurs are dangerous. And this easily could have been, they're all Jaws, right? Every dinosaur's bad. And in the hands of a schlocky director, right, it would have been like every dinosaur is dangerous. So we'll keep the tension really ratcheted up. They're not safe anywhere because all dinosaurs are bad. But no. So you're getting across And I think it's so important too, because unfortunately, pop culture has become a purveyor of information to children, and whatever in whatever way it does, they're learning more from movies than ever before, and less than books and from nonfiction. So it's great to see that a movie will put across a balanced portrait of these animals, and that most of them are vegetarian and these huge benign creatures that are wonderful. That Spielberg keeps that in the middle of this film. There's this wonder of these, and it happens one more time too, which is great. That it's more about nature. They're just animals, and he keeps coming back to that. They're just animals. They're not monsters. They just happen to be big animals. So just very, very impressed with the handling of the subject matter by Crichton and Spielberg and Kep. Just wonderful. And throughout this, we're getting wonderful, Alan Grant is coming into his own as a father in this entire movie. He takes real good care of the kids, actually. He's a really good father figure to them, and he's very reassuring, and he knows his way around the jungle. And so it's nice. It's just enough character development to make us really like Grant. And so now you get this discussion between Hammond and Ellie, and the power's out in the lodge, right? So all the ice cream is going to spoil, so Hammond's eating the ice cream, and they're talking about what went wrong. And, we hear Hammond start to talk about how next time it's going to be fixed. Next time we'll have perfect control. It'll be perfect. And Ellie kind of goes at him. That's your flaw, Our friends are out there dying, and you're thinking about next time it'll be perfect. It'll never be perfect. You're never going to have control. That's the illusion. And it's a great notion. And they have a nice scene. And Hammond gets to have a moment here. Like, Attenborough's terrific. And he talks about when he was a kid and he had a flea circus. And that this theme of his character was like, someday I'm going to have a real thing to show them. And Attenborough is really wonderful. He gives Hammond a very rounded character here. He's just kind of a misguided guy. He's not a bad guy, So, and again, in the middle of Jurassic Park, right, the action movie with dinosaurs, we have these wonderful, these discussions about ethics and about creation and about science, and it's so great. So then the morning breaks, and there's a brachiosaur again with Grant and the kids, and it sneezes and gets all over Lex, who's just completely blasted. Like, she'll be going to shrinks for many years. And they come across eggs in the wild. Grant realizes they're breeding. This is much more of a thing in the novel. They give it very short shrift here because it's never discussed with anyone. But we do get a quick scientific thing here about amphibian DNA, and that some tree frogs discovered that in an all-female population there would be the sort of radical shift of one or two of the frogs to male so they could breed. I don't know if that's real. I didn't look that up, but it sounds like it's coming from some place of authority. But I love that it's there, that they're actually breeding in the wild. And Grant echoes Malcolm's line, "Life found a way." Malcolm was right, So then there's this big moment where back in headquarters, they have to reboot the PC because they can't figure out what Nedry did wrong. Right before they do that, they talk about the lysine contingency. And again, it's more science in this film, which is great. And they don't dumb this down. This is right from the book, that the animals, part of the way they were genetically designed, I believe lysine is an amino acid, and so they're denied the ability to make amino acids on their own, and so they're dependent on being in the food. And then an easy way to kill all the animals in the park is to simply remove the lysine, and within 3 or 4 days they'll all be dead. And they do that quickly, like they bring it off. But of course, Hammond doesn't want to do that, and he wants to put the park back online, and so on and so forth. Now we cut back to Grant and the kids, and they're almost back to the lodge, and there's this wonderful stampede of another herd of dinosaurs, which again I'll have to get to at the end. And again, they're looking at the dinosaurs; they're wonderful. They're talking about herd behavior and so on and so forth. And then, of course, the stampede's upon them, and I like that. Because these dinosaurs are really CGI. Like, they do a good job because the camera's moving around, but it's daylight and they're CGI. But I think they try to make it a little realistic because when Grant and the kids hide behind a tree, we see these CGI creatures jumping on parts of the branches of the tree, making it move. So it gives them a little sense of tactileness that they're really there. I thought it was really smart. And of course, the T-Rex is right after them, and we watch it feeding on one of these things and how gross it is. And there's one moment when they're running in the other direction, and Tim pops his head up, and he's like, "Look at all the blood!" And Grant comes and grabs him. It's really funny. So now they have to do the power's back up, but they have to reboot the generator. So of course, they have to go to some place that's dangerous and do something, like most action movies. So now we get sort of Calhoun and Ellie and the Raptors. what we find out is when they rebooted the system, the raptor fences went down and all the raptors are out now. So like they're all over the place. So now we're into the raptor section, the last third of the film, which is all about the raptors. We're cutting back now to Malcolm and Hammond, who are in the main hall talking to Ellie on walkie-talkie, and she's starting to turn on the systems. Then we're also cutting back to Grant and Tim and Lex, and they're climbing over what was an electrified fence, and there's no other way to kind of get back to the lodge except to climb over this fence, and the T-Rex is kind of on their way towards them. So they have to climb, and as they're climbing down, we get this wonderful tension. Ellie's turning on parts of the park, and the camera sort of pans down ahead of her hand, and we see perimeter fence, and we realize that that's where, they all are. And before this all happens, actually, Sam Grant goes to test the electric fence to make sure it's off, because at that moment it was. And he does the fake electrocution, and then he turns around and smiles at the kid. And Lex goes, "That's not funny." And Tim goes, "That was great." So he's becoming like the coolest dad you could ever have. Lex and Grant make it over the fence, but Tim's too afraid, and he doesn't let go until just after the fences come back on. So he's blown off the fence. Grant has to sort of do resuscitation and bring him back to life, which, of course, he does. And also, what I like here is that the writers are not afraid to use, like, this easily could have been the T-Rex is back. They're hiding from the T-Rex. Had nothing to do with the fence. More T-Rex, maybe more dinosaurs, right? But Spielberg knows he's building to this raptor climax where you're going to be nail-biting for at least 15 minutes. So we get tension by using the infrastructure of the park, which I think is brilliant. It's not all about the dinosaurs. The film's titled Jurassic Park, and we get this wonderful tension because of an electric fence. I don't know. It's these little things why I do this podcast, because I think they matter in films, where you're not overexposed to the same tension device over and over again. He milks the raptors at the end for just about all they're worth. It can be a bit much. I think it's just right. But I feel like if you would have done not the fence, but like another dinosaur scare, you're overloading your audience, which is done now without even a second thought, frankly. So I think that's really cool. Ellie's on her way back. She turned on all the power, and she's like, "We're in business." And the raptors were in the shed, and they appear behind her. These huge faces pop through the pipes. It's a really great moment, a really good scare. So she starts running. Then what we think is Arnold's hand coming down on her shoulder, and it's actually his hand and arm, but not separated to his body. So he's been ingested. So she's bailing out of there. And then we get the last moments of Muldoon, who's hunting the lead raptor, and he's great. There's this great tension moment where he sees her sort of out in the distance, and he's slowly unfolding the stock of his gun and putting the things in. He gets close, and all of a sudden we realize that they're coming. They're on either side of him, and the immortal line that I love, Calhoun says, "Clever girl," and he's torn apart by the raptors. Really violent scene behind bushes, of course, but there's a ferocity to it that's pretty startling. All right, so now get to the raptor scene, and it starts really great. Grant and the kids get back to the lodge, and they leave the kids in the dining room while they go, who knows where they went. Right? I think they go to the control room. But so the kids have this wonderful moment where they find all these sweets and pies and cookies, and they're eating and looking at each other and having a grand old time. Lexi picks up a piece of Jell-O. The camera focuses on her face, and the Jell-O starts to shake in her hand, and her eyes bug out wide, and we realize her raptor has gotten into the hall. Just brilliant. And she's terrific, by the way, in pulling this off. Like, she's really, really good. So they hide in the kitchen, and we get this whole scene in the kitchen with the raptors and the kids, and it's really good. They close the door, and then we get a cut back to Grant talking to Hammond and Ellie. They should be safe in there unless raptors, they learn how to open doors. Then we cut back to the door, and of course, the raptors know how to open doors, and they're in. It's very scary, and they switch between animatronic raptors and CGI, depending on what they're doing in the scene, and it's really good. I mean, just really incredible tension. It's, I guess, a bit of a stretch. The kids have been through what they've been through, because basically the kids kind of take the raptors down. Tim tricks one to go into the freezer and then locks it in there, and then Lexi kind of tricks one into bashing its head against one of the stoves because she did something in a mirror. So I don't know. I feel like it's a little much for kids to be like, playing hide and seek with raptors, but it's incredibly suspenseful, and the raptors are really terrifying looking. probably because they're man-sized, that they're not. Because, with the T-Rex, you're kind of in quasi-Godzilla land. It's just so big, and there's no chance against it in any way. But the raptors, because they're kind of humanoid size, they're just really creepy and wild-looking. So then the last sequence of the film is the control room sequence. The kids and everyone's in this control room, but they can't lock the door. So there's this whole great tension where Lex, being the computer nerd, is like, oh, it's a Unix system. And so she's working to turn on all the locks in the lodge, and Grant and Ellie are holding the door against this raptor. And finally, Lexi, in a triumphant moment, does it. The doors lock. They're all fairly safe. Then the raptor comes crashing through the glass. So then there's this great sequence where they're up in the ceiling, and there's one point where Lex falls out of one of the ceiling tiles, and they grab her, and the camera's looking straight down past her, and the raptor's there on the ground. It's fallen, and it gets up, and they just pull her back in, and this thing leaps up, but it's right towards the camera. Really great shot. And then, of course, they crawl out to the main hall, and they're crawling on the dinosaur skeletons, and of course, at that point, they all of them fall down, and the raptors are closing in. But then the T-Rex comes in, saves the day, and just starts chowing down on them. Basically, you get a brief. They're all in the helicopter. I don't think there's any more dialogue. They're all just kind of in the chopper. When you see the looks on all their faces as they're taking in everything that happened, and then you're out. Okay, so I want to do a little bit of a roundup of the dinosaurs in the film. So to start, despite the title of the film being Jurassic Park, most of the dinosaurs featured actually didn't exist until the Cretaceous period, which is the latter period. But I think it was the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. And the Cretaceous is the last one that ended 65 million years ago. Most of them were Cretaceous animals, except the Brachiosaur and the Dilophosaurus were in the Jurassic period. So not all these dinosaurs, crossed paths, as it were. The T-Rex. So Spielberg acknowledged the T-Rex as basically the star of the movie. And Stan Winston built an animatronic Rex that stood 20 feet tall, weighed 17,000 pounds, and 40 feet long. The paleontologist Jack Horner says it was the closest I've ever been to a live dinosaur. And, seeing it in the movie, it was incredibly well done. While the consulting paleontologists didn't have a consensus on the dinosaur's movement, particularly regarding its running capabilities, there's this animator named Steve Williams decided to throw physics out the window and create a T-Rex that moved at 60 miles an hour, even though, science says the hollow bone structure would have completely collapsed if it ran that fast. So it was done for purely cinematic reasons. And the T-Rex is depicted with a vision system based on movement, although later studies in paleontology indicates that the T-Rex had binocular vision compared to a bird of prey. So the roar was constructed from a baby elephant mixed with a tiger and an alligator, and its breathing was a whale's blow, which is kind of cool. A dog attacking a rope toy was used for the sounds of the T-Rex tearing Gallimimus, I believe. Those were the flock of stampeding animals. And cut sequoia trees crashing to the ground became the sound of the footsteps. So very cool. Velociraptor, obviously, major role in the film. The creature's depiction is not based on actual genus in question, which was much smaller. But interestingly enough, shortly before the Jurassic Park's theater release, there was this they call Utah raptor was discovered, and it was proven actually bigger in appearance than the film's raptors, and prompting Stan Winston to joke, "We made it, and then they discovered it." So when the film came to be released, didn't exist. They discovered it around the same time, actually did. So the raptors were fairly realistic size-wise. And for the attack on Muldoon and some parts of the kitchen scene, the raptors were played by men in suits. So mini Godzilla man in suits here. It's kind of funny. For the raptor sounds, they used dolphin screams, walruses bellowing, geese hissing, an African crane's mating call, tortoises mating, and human rasps. For all the different raptor sounds. Actually, there's one point in the kitchen scene where a raptor makes kind of a call to its mate or its fellow raptor, which is really cool. And then following discoveries made after the film's release, most paleontologists now theorize that creatures like Velociraptor were fully covered with feathers like birds. So the whole bird thing is really becoming more and more the accepted version, that they were not lizards. Okay, then, so there's Dilophosaurus, which was the spitting dinosaur, very different from its real-life counterpart. It was made smaller, like I said earlier, so the audience doesn't confuse it with raptors. The neck frill and its ability to spit venom are completely fictitious, made up by the filmmakers. The vocal sounds were made by combining a swan, a hawk, howler monkey, and a rattlesnake. Brachiosaurus is the first dinosaur seen. Obviously, it's inaccurately depicted as chewing its food. I guess I don't know what that means, and standing on its hind legs that one moment. According to one of the artists, the chewing was done to make it seem very docile, sort of like a cow chewing its cud and not dangerous. Despite scientific evidence of their having limited vocal capabilities, the sound designer decided to represent them with kind of whale songs and donkey calls to give them a melodic sense of wonder, which I think works wonderful. If you're going to if you depart from the science in the right spirit, I think it's terrific. So the Triceratops obviously was another one, being sick and on the ground. The appearance was supposedly a logistical nightmare for Stan Winston because Spielberg wanted to shoot the animatronic, the sick creature, earlier than it was supposed to happen. So there were 8 puppeteers animating the model. One of the guys combined the sound of himself breathing into a cardboard tube with cows near his workplace to create the vocals. So Gallimimus are featured in a stampede scene where one of them is devoured by the T-Rex. They were the first ones to receive digital versions, being featured in these 2 ILM tests that were done. And the animation was mostly focused on the herd stuff, not really individual animals. I think we only really see them in herds. And then there's a dinosaur called Parasaurolophilus, probably destroying that, appearing in the background during the first encounter with the Brachiosaurus, or probably in the beginning when there's that long shot. So those were the dinosaurs. And so brief summary of Jurassic Park. I mean, from all the things that I said, I think it works because they keep the science in it. They allow the characters to be real and have real discussions. There's plenty of science in this. They don't overuse the dinosaurs as sources of terror. They also use the park. Spielberg's masterful camera work and his unmatched ability to create suspense. This is a basically masterclass in suspense filmmaking. Jaws and Jurassic Park. It's ridiculous. John Williams' wonderful score as well on certain points. And they balance the awe and wonder with the terror of it. And as the sequels progressed, it became more about bad guys, bad characters, more and more scary dinosaurs. It was always the dinosaurs terrorizing people. From what I can remember, I may be wrong about The Lost World, but I've only seen each of the sequels once. They sort of fade to memory, and none of them were very interesting for me at all, except there's one cool scene in The Lost World when the ship comes out of the fog and crashes at San Diego. I thought that was pretty amazing. Jurassic Park 3 came out years later, directed by Joe Johnston, where I think you finally got a pterosaur, which they weren't able to do in the first film. But whatever, I found most of the characters and most of the action really, really boring. And then Jurassic World, which came out this year, which introduced the genetically altered dinosaur Indominus Rex. And I found that film very badly written, very uninteresting characters. And I think I only like Chris Pratt's character because I like Chris Pratt. But I think the movie is just really badly written. The dinosaurs look terrific, and they are amazing, and the Indominus is terrific. But when you go back and watch the original Jurassic Park, you realize that Spielberg did more with less. And the guy who did Jurassic World did more with more. It's more carnage, more and more and more carnage. And after a while, you kind of dulled by it. So that's my coverage of Jurassic Park. Thanks once again for listening to Sci-Fi on Screen, to my returning listeners and new listeners alike. If you like what you heard, head on over to iTunes and give us a review. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any suggestions about the show, you can send an email to scifionscreen@gmail.com, or feel free to leave a comment on the website, www.scifionscreen.com, and you can leave a comment in the comments section of the show page. If you'd like to support scifionscreen.com, you can go to patreon.com/scifionscreen, and that's Patreon is Patreon. And to make it easy on yourself, there's a button on the webpage that you can click. Patreon is set up so you can pick an amount you want to contribute per episode, and it'll be recurring. If you'd like to do that, that is available. We'd appreciate all the support we can get. And you can find us, again, our website, www.scifionscreen.com. We have a Facebook page, and on any smartphone, you could search for us on the podcast app and subscribe. Thanks again. See you next time.